Bigfoot may be an urban myth to most people, but in the late 70s, the FBI was investigating whether or not Sasquatch really existed.
From a ranger's chilling face-off with an 8-foot humanoid ape to gold miners under siege by a furious pack of Bigfoots, leaked classified documents reveal the terrifying truth behind the legendary cryptid. For the longest time, individual stories have been reported regarding eerie encounters with strange humanoid beings by park rangers across the U.S. Despite the many reports, there was a pretty successful attempt to cover them up. But in the end, all truths come to light, no matter how deep they may be buried. November 15, 1973, Yosemite National Park. A report filed by Park Ranger M. Thompson of Yosemite National Park detailed an encounter that started with a routine animal rescue and turned into something entirely unexpected. He explained that a couple visiting the Upper Pines area came to his station to report a bobcat trapped in an illegal animal trap about 300 yards from their campsite. Hearing this, and equipped with a catch-all pole, Thompson drove the couple back to their site, where they pointed him toward the direction of the trapped animal. Even before he reached the area, he could hear the cries and growls of the bobcat echoing through the woods.
It has been noted that Sasquatches make something that we now call wood knocks, and quite possibly, they are communicating with one another.
The animal sounded desperate. He suggested the couple stay back, knowing that having multiple people approach would likely make the bobcat panic even more. It was about a 5-minute walk to the trap from where he left them. As he got close, the distinct cries of the animal grew louder, and the air became filled with an intense, pungent odor. The smell was strong enough to make him uncomfortable, and it only intensified the closer he got. At first, he thought the bobcat might have soiled itself in fear, but this smell was unlike anything he'd encountered before. It wasn't the usual scent of animal waste he'd grown to know about in his years as a ranger. It was a mix of wet fur, rotting meat, and an overwhelming skunk-like musk. Thompson spotted the bobcat struggling in the trap when he was about 25 yards from the animal. Its front paw was caught in the jaws, and blood was visible from its repeated attempts to free itself. The ranger paused to assess the situation, carefully considering how to use the catch-all pole to secure the animal while minimizing further injury. What struck him as odd was how the bobcat seemed more focused on something beyond the ridge than on him approaching. The animal glanced briefly in his direction, but then quickly returned to the ridgeline about 100 yards north. Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He began to hear faint rustling noises and an odd growling sound from the ridge. An uncanny feeling washed over him as he worked. It felt like he was being watched.
Indigenous people of the area certainly knew about the Sasquatches that they lived among. When white settlers started coming into the area, they also ran across Sasquatches, and they reported them as wild men or wild women.
His first thought was that a larger predator, maybe a bear or wolf, might be nearby, drawn to the trapped bobcat as an easy meal. The idea of being between a predator and its prey made him uneasy, and he knew he had to work fast. The smell, which had already been overpowering, now seemed to saturate the air, making it hard for him to concentrate. Thompson approached cautiously, taking his time to get the catch-all pole around the bobcat's neck. The animal was clearly in a heightened state of panic, and its movements made the task difficult. He secured the bobcat and moved closer to the trap, careful not to startle the animal further. As he worked to free the bobcat, the noises from the ridge grew louder, though they were still faint and hard to pinpoint. The growling sound sent chills through him, and he found himself glancing toward the ridge more often than he normally would. The feeling of being observed grew stronger with each passing moment. After about 5 minutes of struggling with the mechanism, Thompson managed to press down on the trap with his foot, using enough force to pry the jaws open. The bobcat, sensing freedom, squirmed violently in his grip. Its strength surprised him, pulling him off balance more than once. Finally, Thompson loosened the loop of the catch-all pole, freeing the bobcat completely. Despite its injured paw, the animal ran away at an incredible speed, disappearing into the underbrush almost instantly. Thompson stood there for a moment, catching his breath and trying to process what had just happened. The smell was still in the air, and the strange noises from the ridge seemed to fade, though the feeling of being watched hadn't entirely gone away. Thompson found himself scanning the area, uneasy but unsure of what, if anything, was out there. But the horror had just begun.
In Florida, they have something called the skunk ape, and there's been a lot of sightings over many years of what they describe as a Bigfoot type of creature. What they call that is the skunk ape, partly because it smells skunky.
Thompson described how the strange sounds in the distance had faded, almost as if whatever was out there had been scared off by the commotion with the bobcat. He briefly scanned the area, but it was hard to tell if anything was actually there. Even with the thinner winter tree line, nothing stood out. Needing to document the trap site for his report, Thompson returned to his truck to grab his camera and notebook. He warned the campers to stay alert for large predators, explaining that the injured bobcat might attract them. He also advised them to be careful on their hikes and not to leave food out overnight. Back at the trap site, Thompson started taking notes and prepared to film the trap for his records. He'd recently bought an 8mm camera for a family event and had been enjoying experimenting with it. He thought it might be fun to capture some wildlife while on the job. As he began filming, the awful smell returned, even stronger than before. He heard heavy rustling and distinct snorting sounds coming from the ridgeline. Whatever had been there earlier was back. This time, as it came into view, Thompson realized it wasn't a bear or a wolf. He saw a massive, upright figure covered in dark, matted brown hair. From where he stood, it looked about 7 to 8 feet tall. Its movements were unlike any animal he'd seen before. It walked with a human-like gait, but had a distinct primate quality. The creature paused at the top of the ridge and looked directly at Thompson. Both of them stood frozen, watching each other. Thompson's first instinct was to reach for his gun, but something told him that wouldn't be wise. Instead, he raised his hands to show he wasn't a threat. The creature studied him briefly, then made a series of low, guttural sounds that seemed almost musical, as if trying to communicate.
As the people of the Pacific Northwest described, the most reasonable explanation for these different people describing the same animals is that they were describing the same animals. Sasquatches have a continent-wide distribution.
Thompson admitted that despite his initial terror, he began to feel a strange sense of calm. It was as if the creature didn't mean him any harm, and he had no intention of hurting it either. The creature seemed curious and completely in control of the moment. Thompson, still in shock, suddenly realized he was holding his camera. As he slowly lifted it to start filming, the creature turned and disappeared back over the ridge. After freeing the trapped bobcat, Thompson decided to track the strange creature he had spotted nearby. He followed it from a distance, filming as much as he could before it disappeared. One moment, it was there, and the next, it was gone, as if it had vanished into thin air. Thompson only managed to capture a few brief moments of the encounter on film. He admitted to standing still for several minutes, staring into the thick woods, hoping to see the creature again. Everything around him had gone eerily quiet, as if the sound had been completely drained from the area. Eventually, he returned to clean up the trap site before heading back to his office. Thompson didn't know how to explain what he saw or how to warn the campers about it. He wasn't even sure what it was himself. The campers, however, felt uneasy after the events of the day and decided to leave the area. Thompson didn't blame them. On top of that, he now had a better idea of what these large traps might have been intended for and planned to search for and remove more of them in the future. There was speculation that Thompson might have encountered a Sasquatch, also known as Bigfoot. Reports of sightings were common in Northern California and the Pacific Northwest, especially during the early 1970s. At the time, many scientists refused to seriously discuss such claims. However, one exception was British primatologist John Napier, who studied the Bigfoot phenomenon in the 1970s. In 1973, the same year as Thompson's encounter, Napier published a book, Bigfoot, the Yeti and Sasquatch in Myth and Reality. Napier's research included interviews with eyewitnesses and amateur investigators, as well as reviews of evidence such as footprints and the famous Patterson-Gimlin film from Bluff Creek, California.
Roger Patterson, do you believe what you saw? Or do you think you could possibly have been the victim of a hoax?
I don't believe that there was any possibility that this was a hoax.
While Napier found the evidence inconclusive, he believed the footprints and eyewitness accounts couldn't be dismissed. Napier stated he was convinced that something, a humanoid giant, had lived in Northwest America and that the people needed more information about it. Following Thompson's report, some wondered if Thompson avoided speculating in his report about what he saw to avoid public ridicule. And they seemed to be right. The idea of Bigfoot has never been widely accepted by the general public, even at the height of reported sightings, which may have given Ranger Thompson pause for claiming it to be famous. For those who do believe today, there are several organizations dedicated to the research and investigation of Bigfoot sightings. The oldest and largest is the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, which was established in 1995. The BFRO provides a free database on its website documenting reported sightings and encounters submitted from across North America, all of which have been investigated by researchers to determine credibility. What could these unorthodox professionals have discovered? Perhaps humanity is dealing with a highly intelligent creature that has evolved and adapted throughout the years to the ever-growing world, pushing it deeper into unexplored territory and avoiding humans' ability to capture it with current technology. Or people simply love this campfire monster myth and want the legend to remain just that, a legend, a story, an icon. But Bigfoot's alleged sightings continue to be reported every now and then. How strong is Bigfoot? Olympic National Park incident. On January 27, 2018, seismic monitors in Olympic National Park, Washington, detected an event that looked like a small earthquake. By morning, park rangers had gone to investigate the area near Lake Quinault, where the readings had been recorded. What they found was shocking. The scene was filled with toppled and snapped trees scattered across the landscape. The fallen trees blocked roads and even damaged utility lines. According to field researcher Cliff Barackman, the rangers reported seeing around 100 trees torn apart across an area nearly half a mile long. One of the snapped trees was described as enormous, with a trunk measuring at least 4 or 5 feet in diameter. Some of the broken pieces of wood were as large as 2x4 planks, making the destruction even more staggering. This unusual tree fall quickly became a local mystery. Many wondered what could have caused such incredible damage.
I do not think these trees were knocked down by Bigfoot. You look at behavior of animals, they're very goal-oriented. They don't have a surplus of calories to expend on frivolous activities like pushing down trees, even if they were capable of doing that.
Weather was the most obvious explanation, as unique and destructive weather patterns sometimes occur in the area. However, when photos of the damage were shared online, people began speculating that the destruction might not be natural at all. Barackman noted that some believed the damage could have been caused by a Sasquatch, the legendary creature said to roam the region for centuries. Locals often claimed that Sasquatch, like apes, was known to twist and break trees. Some suggested the creature might have been breaking the trees to show off its strength or to mark its territory, similar to how apes behave in the wild. Could it be a territory marker, a characteristic observed in many suspected Bigfoot habitats? As speculative as that incident was, it was not as real as this one. In 1924, gold prospectors on Mount Saint Helens claimed they had a terrifying encounter with large, ape-like creatures. According to their story, the creatures stood about 7 feet tall, and the men shot at them, injuring one. That night, they said the creatures retaliated. These ape men attacked their cabin, throwing large boulders and ripping holes in the roof until morning. Some believe these territorial creatures, often linked to Bigfoot legends, might have returned. However, according to expert Cliff Barackman, nobody has ever seen a Bigfoot act so aggressively, making such behavior seem very unusual. What could have attacked these men?
Some say the area is haunted by the Lady of the Lake, the spirit of a young woman whose oddly preserved body was found floating in the park's Lake Crescent 3 years after she disappeared. Is what we're seeing here something supernatural? Or is there a more earthly explanation?
Considering the distance between Olympic National Park and Mount Saint Helens, the question now is whether these strange events in the park are supernatural, or if there might be a natural explanation. Experts' perspective. Anthropology and anatomy professor Jeff Meldrum, a strong believer in Bigfoot's existence, firmly rejected the idea that the damage in the Olympic National Park was caused by the creature. He pointed out that animals, including Bigfoot, are very goal-oriented and don't waste energy on unnecessary activities like knocking down trees. Meldrum explained that unless the creatures had a clear reason or benefit, they wouldn't engage in such behavior. On the other hand, Meteorologist Juan Hernandez explored a weather-related theory, but found issues with it. He explained that a microburst, which is a strong burst of wind during a thunderstorm, could knock down trees. However, radar from the day of the incident showed no thunderstorms. Instead, there was only light, steady rain, which didn't fit with the conditions needed for a microburst. Hernandez also explained that microbursts usually scatter trees in all directions, but in this case, the trees all fell in the same direction. He considered strong winds as another possible cause, but the winds that day were coming from the south, while the trees fell in the opposite direction. Tornadoes were also ruled out since they typically leave a crisscross pattern of fallen trees, which wasn't seen here. Hernandez suggested that the damage might have been caused by something called rotor circulation. He explained that this happens in mountainous areas when stable airflow hits a mountain. The air is forced upward on one side and then tumbles downward on the other side in a swirling pattern. This can cause trees to fall in the same direction, even without heavy storms or tornadoes. According to Hernandez, the interaction between the descending air and the updraft creates a turbulent region known as the rotor, which is characterized by rapidly changing winds and severe turbulence. In his perspective, Hernandez believed that this would knock the trees down. And since the force of those falling trees was ultimately so powerful, that's what registered on the seismic monitors. While Hernandez's perspective logically makes a little sense, there have been numerous reports of Bigfoot all over the U.S.
We had a stable layer around the peak, meaning the wind would come up the mountain and quickly descend because of that stable layer on top. That wind was allowed to rotate in a valley where the damage occurred. It does check all the boxes for conditions that would promote the development of a rotor circulation.
However, the scientific community refuses to acknowledge Bigfoot's existence. But what does the U.S. government have to say about all this? The FBI leaks evidence of Bigfoot. It's been confirmed that even the FBI got in on the chase for answers for the existence of Bigfoot when its rumors of being spotted were at their peak. According to the newly released file on Bigfoot, which arrived at the FBI records vault on June 5, 2019, the agency was involved in at least one particular incident in Bigfoot history. The feds analyzed a biological sample that at one point was thought to belong to Bigfoot. But where did they get the sample? In the 1970s, Peter Byrne, a Bigfoot investigator who was then the director of the Bigfoot Information Center and Exhibition, followed up on a possible credible sighting of the mythical creature. During this expedition, according to reports by the Washington Post, Byrne acquired a sample of several hairs and some skin believed to belong to Bigfoot. Following this, Byrne wrote to the FBI several times in 1976 asking if they'd perform an analysis of the hairs, which Byrne noted that his group was unable to identify. On top of that, Byrne also wanted to know if the FBI had analyzed suspected Bigfoot hair before, and if so, he wished to know what the Bureau's conclusion was. These letters make up the bulk of the file and are now available to the public via the FBI Records Vault. Indeed, the publicly available file primarily deals with Byrne's quest to get the hairs analyzed. It features a lot of correspondence between Byrne, Assistant Director of the FBI's Scientific and Technical Services Division J. Cochran, Jr., and Howard Curtis of the Academy of Applied Sciences in Boston, with which the Bigfoot Information Center and Exhibition was affiliated. Initially, the correlation mainly consists of Byrne and Cochran going back and forth, but eventually, the request is finally approved. In a letter Cochran addressed to Byrne dated Dec 15, 1976, he wrote, "The FBI laboratory conducts examinations primarily of physical evidence for law enforcement agencies in connection with criminal investigations. Occasionally, on a case-by-case basis, in the interest of research and scientific inquiry, we make exceptions to this general policy. With this understanding, we will examine the hairs and tissues mentioned in your letter." Also in the letter, Cochran instructed Byrne where to send his hair and tissue samples, along with a request for any available background information concerning the source of the specimen he might have had. Unfortunately, according to the Washington Post, Byrne never received this letter.
These newly released documents by the FBI show they did agree to test the sample, but the letter never reached him.
Howard Curtis of the Academy of Applied Sciences, however, did, so he sent along the samples. The analysis was duly performed, with Cochran writing back to Curtis on February 24, 1977, with the results. In Cochran's response, The hairs that Curtis had delivered to the FBI laboratory on behalf of the Bigfoot Information Center and Exhibition had been examined under incident light microscopy for root structure, medullary structure, and cuticle thickness. As if the microscopic screening was not enough already, the hairs were also compared directly with hairs of known origin under a comparison microscope, after which the FBI was, in fact, able to make an inference. What they found was not what they expected. It was concluded as a result of these examinations that the hairs were of deer family origin. 4 decades later, after the screening of the specimen, the Bureau declassified its Bigfoot file. Just to be clear, this is not evidence that the FBI endorsed the existence of Bigfoot, any more than the U.S. military's decades-long investigation of unexplained aerial phenomena, popularly known as UFOs, is an endorsement of the existence of aliens. To back this up, Benjamin Radford, a well-known American writer and skeptic, said, "All it means is the FBI did a favor to a Bigfoot researcher. There's nothing wrong with that, but it shouldn't be mistaken for de facto government endorsement of the reality of Bigfoot. Even so, Bigfoot believers may be tempted to see it the way they wish." Radford believed that Bigfoot lovers love the idea that there's a smoking gun in the FBI files. He believes that they are convinced that Bigfoot must be real. Otherwise, the FBI wouldn't have taken the matter seriously. Supporting his stance that Bigfoot does not exist, Radford claimed that the FBI didn't send out a team of investigators to look for Bigfoot. Instead, they agreed only to run an analysis of 15 hairs. To add more layers to what is already an unusual case, 93-year-old Byrne didn't seem to remember receiving the FBI's response that the Bigfoot hair he had sent them was actually deer hair. Knowing that Byrne had been out of the country for several months, Cochran sent the letter to the executive vice president of the Academy of Applied Science, which was associated with Byrne's Bigfoot organization. The executive wrote that he would give Byrne copies of the letter when he returned. Yet when the FBI released its Bigfoot file, which was exclusively about Byrne's inquiry, on June 5, 2019, Byrne reacted as though he were hearing that it was deer hair for the first time. "Obviously, I can't speak for Peter Byrne," Radford said. "But if you're going to make a big enough deal about this unknown specimen to give it to the FBI, then you're not going to want to publicize the fact that it turned out to be deer." While this is a disappointing revelation, by no means is the case closed. For all people know, the FBI could have Bigfoot documents that it isn't willing to show the public. And this is all just a clever strategy to throw the masses off in the search for Bigfoot. This can't be further from the truth, as numerous people claim to have encountered the strange creature and even recorded it on tape. In 2019, a Hickory resident and Bigfoot hunter, Doug Teague, filmed what he claimed to be one of the clearest videos of a North Carolina Bigfoot ever seen. He was walking his dog in the woods just outside the city. As he was checking some trail cams, he heard a loud knocking sound in the distance. As he got closer, he spotted an unrecognizable creature on top of a ridge and began recording it. He followed the huge creature's footprints and took casts of them. Doug claimed that as he got close to the creature, it began throwing stones at him, something a bear or another animal could not do. Later, the footprint casts were looked at by an anthropologist who thought that the footprints belonged to a creature about 15 feet tall, something other experts agreed to. Was it a Bigfoot?